welcome back to my channel, and welcome to today's video, which I am finally filming in my office and library. I did manage to set it up this weekend, so basically now all I need to do is decorate it, which I'm very excited about. But one of the biggest things that I needed to do in this room were set up my beloved bookcases, which I did do over the weekend, and I figured since they are probably in the most orderly fashion that they will ever be, I would do a bookshelf tour, because this channel is going on 2 years and I have yet to do one, partly because I knew that I was always going to be moving, and so I knew that they were going to be organized differently. But now I have moved, they are organized the way I want them, and for the first time in a very, very long time, I don't have to double up books, and I actually have some room to spare. Partly because I went crazy and donated between 80 and 90 books just before the move, so I have room to spare. But I figured I enjoy bookshelf tours, so maybe some of you would as well, so I'll talk you through what's on my shelves, my organization, all that fun stuff. But first of all, I just want to say that I do have two rather large bookcases behind me. They are both, I want to say, about 7 feet tall. One of them is primarily my fiction, well actually it's exclusively fiction, and then the other one is primarily non-fiction. I did have some overflow, as you will see, of some fiction, but that bookshelf over on this side is nonfiction. So why don't we go through the shelves and I'll see you at the end of the video. Okay, so we're starting off with the first shelf on my fiction bookcase, which is alphabetized and also is where I keep my classics and mostly my modern classics. So you will see some fan favorites of mine here. I have a huge selection of Daphne du Maurier with Rebecca, which is one of my favorite books of all time present. I've read all three of these, Jamaica Inn, Rebecca, and My Cousin Rachel. So the next du Maurier will be the lesser known The Scapegoat. But also on this shelf are some favorites of mine, Jane Eyre, Carol, which I read last year, Brown Girls, Brown Stones, which I just spoke about, and Moon Tiger, which is Penelope Lively's book that I'm obsessed with currently, as well as my 4 Magda Sabo books that have been translated into English. The favorite for me is The Door, which also happens... Woo! Sorry, guys. The Door, which also happens to be my favorite and the first of her books that I read. Continuing to shelf 2, where I actually have some space, as you can see. I have more of the classics and modern classics here. Most of these are books that I have not read yet. I have read Jean Rhys's Wide Sargasso Sea, which is a origin story for the Mad Woman in the Attic from Jane Eyre. And I did read Mrs. Dalloway at the end of last year, and really enjoyed it. And this massive omnibus of Edith Wharton I still need to tackle. But then once you go over here, we have my phrenology head, which I love. My mother thinks it is very, very creepy, but I just think it's fun. And he is used kind of as a bookend and the start of all of my other fiction books. So just general fiction. A lot of it, unsurprisingly for me, is historical fiction. But again, this is all alphabetized as best I could. There were some exceptions just because the books were too big to fit on the shelf. But these 2 are collections by multiple authors, so that's why I put them at the very beginning. And we start going into A. We have Czarina and the Czarina's Daughter by Ellen Alpston, which were 2 books that I enjoyed. Not gonna lie, enjoyed Czarina much more. Then this is about Catherine I, and then this is about her daughter, Elizabeth. Next, we have more fiction, and thankfully I can now sit you on a tripod so I can reach for books. I have quite a few favorite books of mine on this shelf. We have Conjure Woman by Afia Atakura, which has a stunning cover, and I highly recommend it if you're looking for a book that is set during the antebellum period in the US or the Reconstruction era after the Civil War, because I really enjoyed this book and loved the fact that it was written by a Black author and centered around a Black character. That was something that I felt was lacking in sort of Civil War historical fiction, and this was really good. Unsurprisingly, for many of my OG subscribers, I have a very significant selection of Pat Barker books here. I have The Silence of the Girls and Women of Troy, which are her ancient Greek novels, and they are feminist retellings of the Iliad. And to be honest, The Silence of the Girls was one of the most beautifully written books I have read in a very long time. And then we also have her World War I trilogy, Regeneration, which I just read this year. And I would highly recommend those. And then we also have her other trilogy, which I haven't read yet. And actually, I think they're pretty hard to get in the United States because I had to get these used in order to read them. But moving along to other books on this shelf, we have quite a few chunky ones that I still need to read. We also randomly have a book in French. Cassandra Clare, my friend who lives in Canada, was just like, oh no, it's pretty easy to get French books here. And I was just like, get me something that's YA that I could attempt to read. I did start reading it, but I've fallen off the wagon with my French and I'm really awful. But I do have one fiction book in French up here, and I also have one Sarah Donat book left, In the Company of the Courtesan, which I had several more of her books because she's a really a popular author of mine for historical fiction, especially set during the Italian Renaissance, but I had read all of them. I didn't think that I was going to reread them, so I just kept the one that I still need to read. Moving along to the next shelf, I have the 3 books in the Evie Dunmore series that I have really enjoyed. It is Victorian historical romance with feminist characters in the lead, quite spicy, quite fun, so would 10 out of 10 recommend. In the middle of the shelf are the Janet Fitch books that I spoke so much about last year. The Revolution of Marina M. is the first book in the historical fiction duology, and I loved it. It's a coming-of-age story set during the Russian Revolution, and it was just a lot of fun. It is pretty flowery in its prose, so if that's something that you're not into, I would let you know that and be warned. But I really enjoyed it and enjoyed the character, which is why, even though it's a tome, I picked up the other book in the series. I would say, though, that the first book is the superior one. And then we're just moving along to other books, basically the books from D to H. And I'm actually currently kind of in the process of reading this book, but it was packed in boxes, so I haven't had a chance to really pick it back up again. But this is Light Years by Elizabeth Jane Howard, which is a World War II family saga series that I'm trying out this year since I'm down to not having a series to read. Now this is the shelf that goes from I to O, and it is a lot more historical fiction, with some, again, favorites of mine that I've read over the years. Basically, I do try to get rid of anything that isn't a favorite of mine that I've read, and so what my shelves end up being is largely 5-star reads and my physical TBR. So Jeanne Kalogridis with The Devil's Queen was a book that I was obsessed with years and years ago. It was during a period when I was obsessed with the Italian Renaissance, and this is a novelization of Catherine de' Medici with just the right level of woo with Nostradamus. So I was a fan. I quite enjoyed it. Another favorite of mine that you've seen on this channel is Things in Jars by Jess Kidd, which I read last year and was obsessed with. And also, same thing, Euphoria by Lily King. I ugly sobbed and read this in a day, and it was just spellbinding. But as we go to the other end of the shelf, I have some books that I am embarrassed to say I have not read. Mainly Wolf Hall and Bringing Up the Bodies. I have no idea why I have not read those books yet. I really need to rectify the situation. I also desperately want to get to I, Elizabeth by Rosalind Miles, which I don't know if it's still in print, but I've had it for years and really, really, really want to read it. And also I should mention The Devil Queen. I don't know if it is still in print either, so just a heads up on that. And we're back to not having a tripod, but this is shelf O through Z, actually. And you will notice that Sarah Waters, with all of her books, feature very prominently on this shelf. I have read Tipping the Velvet, The Paying Guest, Fingersmith, and Night Watch. So I still need to read The Little Stranger and also Affinity. I would 10 out of 10 recommend any of these books. They are historical fiction, they are LGBTQ+, they are really dark and atmospheric. If you're into that sort of thing, I would just warn you that they are very slow builds. It takes a little time to get into the plot twists and intrigue. So that is something to keep in mind. But the rest of the shelf is just a pretty big collection of various time periods in historical fiction. We have World War II, which I can't reach right now because I'm sitting far away, with The English Patient. We have early modern England. We have, I want to say, another Russian Revolution with the Bronze Horseman, Lear Wife. The Sarah Waters books are kind of all over the place, and then the book in the corner, The Leisure Seeker, which you can't really see all that well, is actually like contemporary fiction. That one was also a book that made me ugly sob when I read it, and I read it on a plane. So great fun with that one. And the last shelf on the fiction bookcase is where I keep my massive collection of Outlander books, 1 through 9. And yes, before we go any further, it drives me crazy that books 1 and 9 are massive hardcovers and the rest are mass market paperbacks. But what can you do? And then over here is almost exclusively my Gone with the Wind related books. So I have 2 editions of Gone with the Wind there. One that I bought just because it has the stunning actual movie cover with Vivien Leigh and Clark Gable as Rhett and Scarlet. The one that I've read a million times, and when I say a million times, is the red one, Gone with the Wind. And Scarlet was the sequel, written in the 90s. That is total guilty pleasure and trash, but I've read it multiple times as well. And then I just put some of my other books down here because they couldn't fit anywhere else, but it is my War and Peace, My Death of Ivan Ilyich, and this movie tie-in cover of Anna Karenina from like 1948. It is very small because it's an abridged version based on what they showed in the movie itself. But this is again Vivien Leigh on the cover. She's one of my favorite actresses. I'm obsessed. So I just wanted this edition because it's cute, and Anna Karenina is one of my favorite books of all time. We are now technically at the top of the nonfiction bookcase, but as I mentioned, I had to kind of have some of my fiction carry over, and so this top shelf, as you can see, is where I keep all of my Barnes & Noble's classics. I've read quite a few of these. I have quite a few of them to go. But yes, and then at the very end, we have my Anna Karenina, which this is the edition I've read twice. And these I got for Christmas from my parents. They're the cloth-bound editions of War and Peace and Anna Karenina. They are beautiful, my pride and joys. And now the last shelf of fiction, which has plenty of room to expand, which makes me super happy. But over here we have my paltry collection of poetry. I am not a huge poetry reader, and so that is why. But it is bookended by my Rodin the Thinker. I really, really love sculptural art. It's something that I am obsessed with when I go to museums, and I actually bought this from a museum in Copenhagen when I was there. I saw the real thing in France when I visited years ago, and I'm still obsessed. And then we have my collection of plays, which are bookended by this very fragile alabaster bookend. I'm not going to bring it forward because it's kind of in pieces. It needs to be glued, but I hold on to it for sentimental value because it was my grandmother's, my mother's mother. It was broken when she had it, so it just kind of keeps on living. It's very, very heavy too. But over here, the majority of what I own would be my Tennessee Williams stuff, as well as Shakespeare, but I do have some other plays, Tea and Sympathy, which I talked about last year, and is a dated play now about toxic masculinity. I also talked a ton about Lungs recently, and that's a more contemporary play about the existential crises facing civilization today. But that's my collection of plays for now. Okay, we're finally on the nonfiction, and this is a shelf that has some room to grow here. But what I've done with my nonfiction is kind of broken it up in a couple of ways. This shelf is primarily the collection of memoirs and letters and autobiographies, basically the things written by the people themselves about themselves. So we have a couple memoirs. This is high on my TBR, Testament of Youth, after I watched a movie adaptation of it, but it is a memoir about a young woman living during World War I. So I really, really, really want to read that. And a lot of these books, honestly, have been on TBRs in the past. I know To the Lake has been. I know Molotov's Magic Lantern has been. I know The Victorian and the Romantic has been. And this is a book that I'm slowly but surely working on. It's The Diaries of Sophia Tolstoy, which everyone knows I am obsessed with her. But it is her diaries, so it's not like it has a plot. It was never meant for like mass consumption, so it is something that I'm like gradually working my way through. And then as you can see, Here we have the other alabaster bookend, the one that isn't falling to pieces. Moving on to the other side of this shelf, we have a collection. Let's go in a little bit further for you guys. We have a collection of the best American travel writing books. Randomly, I am missing the year 2016, so I will need to rectify that. But I am so inspired by travel writing, and these collections are great for introducing you to journalists and writers that you wouldn't know about. Unfortunately, I believe the 2021 edition is the last one that they are doing of this particular set. I think there are like the best of American short stories and blah 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 that they're continuing. Unfortunately, travel writing is not one of them. This globe here, which likes to roll away from me all the time, is just something that I like to keep on the shelf with the travel books. It was something else that I bought when I was traveling. This, I believe, was bought in Seville when I was in Spain. It's just a map of the world, a globe, essentially. But I think I bought it either after I visited the tomb of Christopher Columbus or something of the sort. But it's just a cute little globe, and I do really enjoy globes. Moving on to the next shelf, and I should mention that again, for the most part, I try to keep things alphabetical, but this is where I essentially keep all of my biographies and those types of things. The three books actually at the very end are ones that I couldn't fit on the shelf above, so that's why I keep them here. These are Tennessee Williams notebooks, which I flipped through obsessively when I was writing my senior thesis in school to see if he could shed any insights on what I was arguing for. Hillary Clinton's Hard Choices just couldn't fit on the shelf, and then I have this random collection of stories written during the 40s for the New Yorker that I occasionally thumb through as well. I am not a huge short form person, but I do occasionally enjoy it, especially when I need inspiration for writing myself. And then, as I said, this whole shelf is basically biographies with a serious focus on women throughout, because that is what I enjoy reading about women in history. So we have Svetlana Alexievich, The Unwomanly Face of War, which is one of my favorite books. I think it was my favorite book of last year, through my book brackets and all of that. It could probably fit on the shelf I talked about above because it is like an oral history, as it were, but if you want to hear about the sort of gritty war efforts and the ways that women contributed to World War II in Russia, this is the book. Like, it does not sugarcoat anything. It is very, very raw and heartbreaking at times, but also super inspiring at others. So that's a book that I'd highly recommend. Also on this shelf, unsurprisingly, Tigress of Forli, which is another biography that I really enjoyed. I was reading it at the same time that I was obsessed with the Italian Renaissance. It is on Caterina Sforza, and she's just a historical badass. And same thing with Catherine the Great by Robert K. Massey, which was another favorite book of mine last year. I never shut up about it. It does what it says on the tin. It is the definitive biography on Catherine the Great of Russia. So, yes. And for anyone who doesn't know that I am mildly obsessed with classic Hollywood, I do have these two books from Turner Classic Movies, which are 50 of the most unforgettable actresses of the era, and then the companion one, which is on the leading men, and just has some fun little facts about those individuals. Next, we have the shelf of basically histories is what I call them, because to be quite honest, this is what I read the most of, is nonfiction that is history focused, even as you will have seen from my memoirs, my biographies, and the like. That is a large degree of what I read. So actually this is a shelf that probably has the most books that I still need to read on it, because I did get rid of quite a few books that I've already read. And so yeah, I can't say a whole lot about any of these. I would say that The Romanovs is a book that I don't know that I will ever read it from cover to cover, because it kind of is like a primer on the history of the Romanov dynasty, which you can see started from 1613 and lasted until 1918. I think it's very good if you are someone who wants an introduction to Russian history, but I studied it, so this is more of something that I flip through when I need a refresher. So moving on to the next shelf, which is a continuation of the history books. Again, quite a few, I think all of these are books that I still need to read. This is one that I have been scared to start, because I feel like it is going to be incredibly heartbreaking, but it is a book that I am very interested in reading at some point. It's just any sort of history on the concentration camps, you know, is going to be brutal as it should be. So that's why I haven't gotten to that one yet. And then over here, with a little bit more space on the shelf, is where I do keep what are considered like my writing references. So I have like my MLA book here. My Elements of Style is up at the top. And my pocket style manual is here as well. I am probably one of the few people that still has a physical thesaurus and a little dictionary, but they've just traveled with me basically since high school. The rest of the books are really on writing itself. They were things that I picked up when I was going through a phase where I wanted to be a novelist. Like, I think quite a few bookworms went through, but now they're just really good when you want to really analyze, like writing a dialogue, like a scene of dialogue or a scene or a character, or if like when I'm looking at poetry or sort of classics, checking symbolism and things like that. It's just a lot of fun for those reasons. And the last shelf on these mammoth bookcases is really my miscellaneous section, and probably one of the more interesting shelves, just because of the sheer like variety that is here. Some of these books are books that I bought on my travels, like this Hans Christian Andersen I actually bought at Tivoli in Copenhagen, because I thought, why not? I'm in his native land. And same thing with some of these over here. These are books that I picked up when I was visiting these locations because I wanted more like information on the architecture or like photos. Here are really some of the last of my like college books that I have hung on to. These are the ones that were from some of my favorite courses. I had taken a course on Imperial Russia, which is why I have these two. I took a course on 19th century Europe, and so this is just a collection of various passages and writing from the time period because I was a cultural historian. This was an anthology that I've liked to hang on to. And same thing with this Gothic fiction as well. It was an anthology for an English class. And then over here, I do have some books in French, Le Petit Prince, and some dictionaries in foreign languages. So I have one for French, and I do have a Spanish to English, because back in the day, I did actually study Spanish. Not that I, recall any of it. And now we're going off the grid to where I have some other books around the office. This is just next to my reading chair. They're books that I didn't really know where to put. An Edited Life is by an influencer, Anna Newton, who I've been following for years and years and years. She's who inspired me to do the capsule wardrobe, which inspired me to do my capsule bookcases. And I just like flicking through it. Same thing with House Magic. It's just some interesting sort of advice and tips for adding some woo to your household chores and rituals. And then The Women Who Made New York is just like a collection of very short biographies on the women who made New York with lovely imagery. And then we have these guys over here, which are held up by my Art Nouveau dancer bookend. This will be where I keep my active TBR, but for now, it is just where I've kept books that basically I didn't have room for on my shelf. I forgot to put them into their slots. I did just read Tanta Ifa, so you will be hearing about that in an upcoming wrap-up, but The Great Mrs. Elias is one that I still need to get to. And then, yeah, I have these guys, which are some of my older books that I own. I do have some other old books. Some of them were printed in the 19th century, if I remember rightly. So they're quite old. They're not first editions, but I just thought they were very, very lovely. If anyone would ever be interested in a video on my antiquarian books, let me know, because I do have these 5 here that I could show you in more detail, and I think I have about 5 or so more downstairs. So yes, that is my bookshelf tour. I hope you enjoyed it and were able to get a sneak peek of some of my physical TBR. Actually, you got a sneak peek of basically my entire physical TBR. So if there are any books that pique your interest, let me know, because I can try maybe to get to a few of them sooner rather than later. But I do hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up, comment, and subscribe, because all those things mean the world to me, and they help this little channel grow. And we are so close to 1,000, guys. So close. So thank you again, and I will see you next time. Bye!